Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to What is Going Om, for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on Om Times flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. In February 1973, Dr. Bernard Beitman found himself choking uncontrollably in his kitchen, unable for several minutes to catch his breath or swallow. The very next day, his brother called to tell him that their father had died, having bled into his throat and choked on his own blood, at the same time that Bernard Beitman was having his mysterious episode. From that moment on, Dr. Beitman became fascinated with what he calls meaningful coincidences. After becoming a professor of psychology at the University of Missouri, Columbia, he published several papers and 2 books on the subject and started a non-profit, The Coincidence Project, to encourage people to share their coincidence stories. Bernard Beitman joins me now to talk about his latest book, Meaningful Coincidences, How and Why Serendipity and Synchronicity Happen. Bernard Beitman, welcome.
Glad to be here, Sandie. It's been a long road.
It's certainly been a long road. This particular incident, is that what inspired you to become a psychologist, or were you already thinking about it?
I had already been thinking about it, and it was psychiatry that I am doing. But I'm more a psychologist than a psychiatrist. So in a way, that's right. It's kind of like Jung was very psychological, but really was a psychiatrist. Trying to bridge mind and brain is part of what I'm doing, and I'm able to do that more because we have better information about how the brain works.
And wasn't it Jung that coined the phrase synchronicity, meaningful coincidences?
Yes. Yeah. It's a long and winding road too, but he tended to use synchronicity to mean an acausal connecting principle, by which he meant a way of explaining meaningful coincidences, which was the primary term that he used. But over time, it's become synchronicity equals meaningful experience. But that's not right. Meaningful coincidence, but that's not accurate either, because synchronicity is one form of meaningful coincidence. That's why serendipity is in the title, because it's a different, overlapping but different kind of coincidence.
But aren't all coincidences meaningful in one way or another?
Not necessarily. Meaning is in the mind of the beholder, usually.
Yes. Yeah.
So there are plenty of people who see a coincidence and maybe use it, like a guy is just happened to get the right loan officer at the bank to get a loan, and a friend of his passed by, knows the loan officer, and knew the person who was applying for the loan, and it was a good coincidence for that meeting to take place. And the guy watching it could see that it happened meaningfully for the person who experienced it, but he didn't describe it as a meaningful coincidence. He just saw it as an opportunity, the guy who got the loan. And a lot of coincidences people don't notice, or they just say it's a mere coincidence. That's very common. That's why I use the term coincidence is kind of ambiguous, but the term really is defined by its adjective. What adjective are we using? And meaningful is one of them, or an amazing coincidence. It usually means meaningful. Mere or only or just usually suggests a coincidence that doesn't have any meaning to the person experiencing it.
So that incident in 1973, clearly, incredibly meaningful. Incredibly meaningful,
yes.
But before that, you'd obviously had coincidences and not thought twice about them.
Oh, not true. That's part of the fun of this. Yes, that was dramatic. and it illustrated telepathy, because that's a form of telepathy,
Yes.
to feel the pain of a loved one at a distance. But the first one, the one that got my attention, not that I was going to study it, but that got my attention, there was something weird going on, was when I was 8 or 9, and I came home and I said, "Hey, Ma, where's Snapper?" That's my dog, our dog, my dog. He was my best friend. And where's Snapper? My mother was standing in the doorway of the front door, and she said, "I don't know. Why don't you go to the police station? Maybe they know." Which remains to me a question about why my mother suggested that. And that's one of those Zen koan kind of things. What did you? So I got on my bike and I went to the police station, and I had to cross the big road near my elementary school to get there. And I climbed up this, parked my bike and climbed up the stairs, and then went more stairs, and then this big door. It still seems big to me as I remembered it. And opened the door, and a big man was sitting behind a big desk. And I said, have you seen my dog?" And he shook his head, said, "Sorry, son, we haven't." I started crying, and I'll start crying now. And I started going down the steps and got on my bike. Instead of going across the big road, I was blinded, and I just went to the right on the sidewalk I'd never been on before. And walking towards me in his own inimitable way was a dog that looked a lot, came a lot, and became Snapper. And so he he jumped on my leg as if to say, "What took you so long?" And we went home. He had to make 4 turns to get to where I did, 1 turn for me. So that was the most meaningful coincidence of my life until my father, because I loved that dog and he loved me, and we were buddies. I needed him really a lot. And so that was the beginning of it. And in between, my father and when I was about 31 when it happened with my father, and I was 8 or 9 when found my dog, or he found me, who knows? There had been a bunch in between, so I have another book in press, and Sandie, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it, which I hope will be entitled "The Adventures of Dr. Coincidence."
Okay, so we will talk about that a little bit later. And I want to go back to the dog issue. When you look at Rupert Sheldrake's work with dogs, dogs who know when their owners are coming home, is that a coincidence? Is it entanglement? Is it, what is it? Is it the fact that, there's some kind of telepathic communication going on between you and your dog? Why do we call it coincidence?
Well, coincidence is the coming together of 2 events in an unexpected way.
But it almost minimizes them. I mean, coincidence is such a throwaway term.
And that's why I use it, because it's not synchronicity. For the general public, it becomes an entry word into the general vocabulary, because my job, and you're helping me with this, is being able to get the idea of synchronicity into the general consciousness, because I think it's very helpful in being able to show how interconnected we are, how we're part of a greater mind together, how our hearts are much more connected to each other than we admit and are told. But I want to use the word coincidence because it doesn't have a kind of woo-woo sound to it, but then get to the synchronicity.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you and I have had conversations on this topic before, and one of the questions I asked you was, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Because I have so many coincidences or synchronicities based on my intentions. I put an intention out there. There it is. Is that a coincidence? Is it synchronicity? Is it magic? Is it God's will? What is it?
Oh dear. You want to know how reality works, I think, and so do I. And I use the synchronicities and serendipities as clues to how this tapestry, this interconnected network that we're a part of, how that functions. It's not enough to say we're all interconnected. It's how we're interconnected that becomes the problem. But when you bring up a lot of the terms like quantum, like telepathy, uh, we need to understand what we're talking about better. Quantum entanglement is a lovely metaphor. But if you're actually going to entangle two particles, it takes a lot of effort to get to get two electrons to be entangled with each other so you can separate them. And the metaphor for my father and me is that we were entangled emotionally. But I don't think it's the same thing as the entanglement in quantum physics. It might be. The metaphor is an excellent one, but I'm looking more at trying to explain it in more measurable scientific terms. So I use the idea of the psychosphere, a mental atmosphere, the noosphere, Teilhard de Chardin called it. And other people have been using the term psychosphere as our mental atmosphere, just like we have an air atmosphere. And I think we can explain telepathy in terms of the psychosphere and intense relationships rather than going to quantum mechanics as the metaphor for explanation.
Okay. Well, I'm going to come back to this a bit later and tell you about something that I've just read, and we can discuss that. But first, let's talk about, the book. It demonstrates how, regardless of their cause, meaningful coincidences can enrich our life. How so?
I didn't realize I was so attached to my father or connected to my father. Now I know. I mean, not only did he die I die while I was choking or choking while he was dying, but he died on my birthday. That becomes meaningful. And my birthday is coming up on February 27th. And each birthday is like a memory of my father. And that is, I call that useful. It's to commemorate my father. And I get more deeply in tune to that than I have before. Finding my dog. What could be more practical than finding my dog? So you see connections with people like I'm doing. You probably do this. You're telepathically connected to other people. You kind of know what they're thinking and what they're feeling at a distance. I mean, it really gets to be fun after a while, and it doesn't have to be someone that you're in love with, somebody you have a good relationship with, and you can kind of like, oh well, she's not that interested in talking with me today, so okay, I got some idea. I'll stay away from her on that one. But sometimes I can feel what she's talking about and thinking about, and or the telephone call, I'm thinking of somebody and they can't. That's the most common one, but there are other ways that we can feel other people. So it shows how interconnected we are, and that we can connect, and that we can communicate in ways with each other that are not the standard way we communicate, like we're doing right now, or telephones or video ways of doing things. So that's one practical use. But finding people like my dog, but finding people who are helpful to you and to whom you can be helpful, finding out information that's important to you, finding a job possibility that just seemed to come out of the blue, to be able to find money in unexpected ways. And also, very importantly, is the spiritual aspect of synchronicity, because it shows us that we're part of something greater, and feeling part of something greater is so important in these days of social isolation and loneliness.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that part of it. So there are 4 types of meaningful coincidences: synchronicity, serendipity, seriality, and simulpathity,
Hey,
which is a
thank you.
word that you created. So
That's right.
tell me what that word means.
Well, first, please note, you like words too, that each of those words begin with an S and end with an ITY. Well, that was part of the fun of making simulpathity up, is to make it resonate with those other 3. And why they're different ones, because synchronicity tends to mean a connection between mind and object, or mind and environment. So you have an intention, which sometimes could be thought of as a precognition. And to be able to separate out intention from precognition is part of the fun here. Oh, I'm intending this, but okay, well, maybe there's a combination of the two that probably also take place. But synchronicity is mind and object, or mind and environment, usually. Serendipity is mind and object, but usually finding something of use. While synchronicity tends to be psychological or spiritually oriented, serendipity is pretty practical. A lot of discoveries are made by accident. Somebody spills something on the floor or on a stove and find a way, or leaves the heat on. As something happens, like a dog picks up a lot of burrs on his fur, and some curious guy says, I wonder how that happened. How do those burrs stick to the fur? So we end up having something that sticks things together when you put them together. And he just discovered that by being curious. It's Velcro. That's how Velcro works. These little burrs on the fur. So it's you can discover things by accident. It's like Happy Accidents is the name of a book written by an anesthesiologist about all the happy accidents in medicine. Just how did it happen that lithium got discovered for bipolar disorder? It was an accident. But the best story, and we won't go through it, is the discovery of penicillin. And there was a whole series of events that led from an accident in the lab to penicillin being used in World War II as a major antibiotic, and probably helped the West, the Allies, survive and win because they're able to treat their soldiers who were mostly dying of infections, not of actually being killed directly. So penicillin is the paradigmatic example of serendipity and seriality. Some of you may know Paul Kammerer, who was a botanist, biologist in Vienna, wrote a book in 1919 called The Law of Series. And series are coincidences where you see two things next to each other, or more than two. Like one person I knew would see monkey symbols regularly. They would monkey around with her. She has a series of 1,000 of them that she wrote down, and they each of them were some kind of message to her, but they're all visual representations of an idea that other people could see. So the difference in seriality is you can see each of the elements. It's not just mind and object. It's not mental telepathy or choking as with my father. It's a series that is observable by an external person.
So when people see numbers, we're hearing this a lot, 1111, 22, 33, 44, and people have published books with meanings for all of those, but, where do those meanings come from out of somebody's mind?
That number thing, I like that. I would ask you about, what do you think about it? But these numbers.
I have noticed, do we make it fit? I can remember having an experience once and then seeing 1111 and thinking, oh, well, that must, because those numbers are master numbers in numerology, that must mean that I've got to take notice of this experience I just had. That must have been a meaningful experience. I mean, which came first? I don't know. I put that interpretation on it.
Yes. So important, Sandie, that we put our interpretations on it, which is why when people ask me, as you started to, is, well, what causes these things? Well, I say, how do you think the world works? Because if you like quantum mechanics or quantum physics, okay, that's the way you will interpret meaningful coincidences. That's just what you will do. Numbers are tricky because there's so many of them around. And if you're on a 24-hour clock instead of the 12 that we in the United States are, then you got 222 you can also do, which is even rarer, actually, is for people who experience it. So what meaning are you going to put into them? What is the most common way people interpret meaningful coincidences? Just kind of the way you just said it. They're affirmations that what just happened is important, or that you're on the right track. That's the most common use. It's like we want to be patted on the back for the decision we just made. And there comes a number giving us that pat on the back.
And we've had a lot of events and workshops and seminars taking place on specific dates like 08, 08, 08, you know, and someone says that that is a significant date. Is it really? We don't know. But they're making it significant.
That it's a little bit like your intention versus precognition.
Yeah.
We want to put things in categories, this or that. It doesn't work that way a lot. We live in a polarized world for sure, or it's either this or that. But the polarities have continua between them, like dark and light are continua, but at dawn and dusk, our polarities rather, at dawn and dusk, they're a continuum. You go from light to dark and dark to light. And sometimes take a picture of dusk or dawn or sunrise, sunset. Take a picture. You don't know whether it's a sunrise or a sunset. It's not just dark and light. It's not just black and white. There are continuum. The same thing is true with explanations. It's quantum physics that does it, or it's the morphic field is the way to explain it. What I emphasize that you are implying, and I want to just bring that out really loud for us, is individual responsibility. That we have free will and we have no choice about having free will. We got it. Yes. It's the degree of free will. In certain contexts, we have limited. In other contexts, we have greater. When it comes to many coincidences, meaningful coincidence, we have the choice about how to interpret it. They're not commands. They are suggestions to investigate, to wonder about. How are you going to use them? So we have the ability to decide ourselves how to use many of these things. And so much of this world now is people trying to give responsibility off to somebody else. And we've got to be responsible for meaningful coincidence interpretation and for what's going on in the world. And as you heard me say, I think synchronicity can be a way of helping us in this time of crisis.
Mm. You recently had an episode of your own podcast with Jeff Dunn titled, "Is Your Future Creating Synchronicities in Your Present Life?" How did that one go?
There's a lot of ways to answer how did that one go, but he and Jeff Dunn and I are working on the person I interviewed in that, working on a project to look for patterns in coincidence stories using artificial intelligence. This is a way of understanding how people may miss the basic patterns that define how they operate. For example, in this book, The Adventures of Dr. Coincidence, I noticed that I have certain coincidence patterns that I hadn't really been aware of before. Like I knock on strangers' doors and weird stuff happens. And it's a lot of stories about how that happened. There's a portal. Doors are portals. So that's one thing that came out of that, of talking with Jeff Dunn. But when you ask about the future and what it has to do with creating us, part of the book of creating what we're doing, we are so caught up in causal thinking that the past makes the present. And Freud was right about in the past creating psychological problems in the present. But what psychotherapists and many others ignore is how we are drawn to particular futures, that we have tasks that seem to be given to us. Some people call it a soul mission.
Life contract?
For me, it's a job. I got a job. I got enough money so I can do it, but it's like a job. I got to do this synchronicity business, and you're just helping me do it. I got to get it out there in the world and get people talking about it. That's my job. And we're drawn to these futures. it's teleological, or teleology is a term for that. And in the book that Jeff Dunn wrote, it was about how we're drawn to the future, not just the past, but the future is helping create what we're doing now. And the more we tune in to how we're being drawn to a future, the better we can get to where we probably need to go.
Yeah, but then where does free will come into that? Because, I can say that my entire life I've been drawn in a particular direction, and I've moved in that direction. And that started at the age of 4 years old. Is that a contract? Is that something that I knew I came in with? What is it? And does it mean that I don't have free will?
Well, that's two questions there. Is it a contract? Yeah, it kind of that. And did you come into this life? You're implying that you had a past life, which a lot of people believe, and you do. I can tell. And you kind of know it and have experienced it, and know people that you've met who have been there in your life before. So that's you kind of know that. So that are you here to do this? Did you sign some agreement that you're going to be able to do this before? You always have the choice of not doing it. But there's a way that it isn't a choice, as it is for me. I don't have a choice really to not do what I'm doing. I've got to. I mean, I cannot do it. I have a choice. I do have that choice not to do it, but it's so much what I gotta do is.
I get it. It's what I call the non-negotiables in my life. There is a directive, and I don't know where that comes from, but I have to do what I do, and thankfully I enjoy what I do. But that still brings in the question about free will.
The free will. I mean, it tends to be yes or no when people ask about it. And as I try to suggest, there's degrees of it. And as you do your job, and as I do my job, I am making lots of decisions that are based on intuition and rationality coming together. And I've made some bad decisions. I've made some that I've tried to learn from. So who's making the decision? There's something that I am doing. I can just say, yes, I'd like to be on your podcast, or no. If I can see that it's going to be helpful somehow to me and to others, like I'm going to be talking with somebody today, a very, very dear friend, and more than that, somebody I love a great deal, about what we are going to do together today. Later, she's coming over for dinner, and I'm preparing my speech, and she's got things that she's doing and has to do, and whether they come together or not is part of the mystery of that I will get some answers about today. That there's a mystery in here where we decide and we act, but there are other people who are also deciding and acting, and we decide, I'm acting, I've decided to do this, I'm going to talk with her, that's my decision, and I don't know where it's going to go. And that's part of the fun of this, is to have a general idea in mind, but have no idea really how you're going to get there. And that's part of the adventure. And that's where we make a lot of decisions that are our own.
So when you have dinner and you present her with whatever it is you want to talk about, and she says, I've been thinking exactly the same thing, you'd regard that as a coincidence or a synchronicity?
I've regarded it as, thank goodness.
Okay, well, on that note, we're going to take a short break. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is Bernard Beitman, MD, author of the book Meaningful Coincidences: How and Why Serendipity and Synchronicity Happen. We'll be back with more from Bernard Beitman after this break.
Om Times TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of Om Times' flagship radio show, What Is Going On? And as an author, editor and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who have walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees and no BS, just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Bernard Beitman, you say that we have more to do with creating coincidences than we think, and thus we can cultivate synchronicities in most aspects of our life. Why do you say most and not all?
I don't know. I don't like to say everything's everything. I just recognize that there are limits to what I can understand.
Well,
Yes, everything.
You know, if I know that I can create a synchronicity in most aspects, then I know I can create it in all. Right?
Then you know that. I don't know it as well as you do.
Okay. Tell me how we can cultivate that.
Well, you're talking about a very upgraded version where you can imagine, you can intend, and make something happen. And that's something I've slowly discovered. I wanted to run the opening kickoff back for a touchdown. I have a film of doing that, 97 yards, hit the first pitch of a baseball game for a home run. I did that. So I could imagine stuff on the sports field and other things like writing books, but I had to put out the effort to be able to do that. When you have an intention, I imagine you still have to act on helping to create it. Is that right?
No, not necessarily. In some intentions that I've had, I just carry that intention and then it shows up.
Give me an example.
Well, in my career, I've done pretty much everything in the media, television, radio, magazines, books, you name it, I've done it all. The one thing I haven't done is work on a film. And for the last couple of years, I was thinking, oh, that would be nice. Wasn't something that I put a lot of energy and effort into. Just occasionally, I think, yeah, it would be nice to work on a documentary. And suddenly this year, somebody's offered me the opportunity. I call that a synchronicity. I don't think I brought that into being, but maybe I did bring it into being. Who knows?
Well, that's a little different from having an intention to be in film. That's more like what I was thinking about. You're ready for it, and it's precognitive, and it's inviting the possibility in. I think those are all variables in helping that to happen.
Well, define intention. Are you saying then that if I had put a lot of work and deliberately worked at making that, visualized it, etc., then it would have been an intention? But just because I carried it thinking, yeah, I want to do that, that's not an intention?
I think it can be called an intention. I mean, I think you're asking a very good question, because there's a lot of people intending about intentions these days. There's a lot of that going on, and it's the same thing that I run into with quantum entanglement. It's or more pressing is, what is love? It's there's many different definitions people use and throw them around, but they have different meanings to the person speaking, to the person who's listening to it. So I haven't had this discussion about intention with anyone. So and I haven't thought about it in much detail, except for me, an intention for me, and that's just me, was visualizing it and putting some energy into it, and that was part of what I thought intention was. But you're broadening the
I used to do that.
definition.
I used to do that, and I used to work at it, and it always worked. But I don't anymore. Now I find it sufficient to just, that's something that I'd like.
Well, you're getting to be a master.
Maybe.
No, I mean, you're doing something that I'm not particularly familiar with, and I'll have to look at how I might be doing something like that more subconsciously.
I think you might, and I think a lot of people do it and don't realize they do it. But what I want to know is, tell us how you would advise people in cultivating synchronicities.
Well,
Is it by putting their focus on it?
We have to back up. You're like in fourth year in college with this thing. It's just like we go back a little bit. You have to think that they exist. That really helps. Your audience probably thinks they exist. Then you have to have a little bit of a coincidence alert button, so that you recognize when one has happened. And once you recognize one has happened, what then do you do with it? How do you interpret it? But there are ways that also can increase them, which intention is one of them. But to recognize that during times of stress, that transitions in life, like job transitions, relationship transitions, just even getting lost, in some form or another. When your regular reality organization breaks down, so things aren't as structured, then coincidences are more likely to happen. Synchronicities and serendipity are more likely to happen, partly because you're on the alert and you're looking for something to help organize yourself. But there may be something else that goes on during those times of when things are breaking down for your structure. And it's what's going on in the world now. The world structure is very much breaking down. And so with that, we are seeing, I think, more synchronicities, people reporting them, having more experiences of them, getting messed up by them, by having too many of them. So it's when structure breaks down, pay attention. You're quite likely to be seeing them. It's also know something about yourself. What kind of personality do you have? If you're a person who tends to think everything around you tends to be about you, it's called self-referential, then you're going to see more coincidences. When you're in high emotional states, you're also much more likely to be able to see them. So those are recognizing when you're in a situation that will then increase them. But then how do you then increase them deliberately? That's another question, and that's the intention becomes part of it. It's also being able to have in mind the possibility that things might come together for you in a way that might be workable for you. So there's an anticipatory idea that things might work for you. If you start thinking that things are connecting and can connect, and you're really kind of lost a little bit, or you have something you want to have happen, there appears to be, and this how this happens, part of the fun of it, is like stuff shows up.
Yes. Yes.
Just,
Yeah.
you got to be looking. You got to expect the unexpected.
Yeah, and also expectation is important. I find that more and more as I get older, more synchronicities, coincidences, intentions, whatever, that have been successful, the more I expect them to be. So I don't worry about things because I expect that it is all going to work out, and it does.
It's probably not worrying about it helps make it happen.
Yeah.
The more relaxed you can be, and that just happened to be recently. This person I'm talking to tonight gave me a song sheet that her great grandfather wrote in probably 1880, and we were having dinner, and she wanted to have it like produced because she wanted to hear what it sounded like. So I thought that this could happen. So I made a couple of contacts, and then the guy I was talking about, the lock here in my house, connected me with somebody, and he going to do it or not. It came in time for the day before her birthday, so I was able, and I was able to give it to her on her birthday, and it was such a nice thing for me to do. And I think it was good. I know it was good for her too. She really enjoyed that part of it. So, but to be relaxed about putting together an odd thing, a grandpa song, and somebody to produce it right on her birthday, you got to have a few little things going in your direction to make that happen.
Yeah. I think the bottom line of all this is we're so much more powerful than we think we are. And I think that we can do and achieve a lot more than we are conditioned to believe.
That's my message too, Sandie. That we have more power. What we have to do is also be more ethical and more moral. We have to understand that we do impact other people.
Yes.
And we have to do it in a moral and ethical way. And what we have in the world that a lot of people already recognize is a huge imbalance in economic capacity that is tilting the world in a very negative direction, among other things. Power and money still go together. That's influence. That's able to do stuff. Well, we have abilities to form together to help create a world that could be much more fun than a lot of people are having right now.
Yeah. And that must be something that, you created the Coincidence Project to gather people's stories, for people to share their stories. That is a big step towards helping people understand the power that they have.
It is.
And when they come together and collaborate using that power, you can create miracles.
Yeah. And the Coincidence Project was intended to be just what you just said. And I imagined it. And there it was. It's like, okay, it's fun doing that. It's fun imagining stuff that's a good idea and then having them happen, as you will know. Another way to increase coincidences, synchronicities, serendipities is to come to the Coincidence Project Cafe, the Coincidence Cafe, we call it. That's every third Saturday of the month. At 11 a.m. Eastern time, and I can send people the link to register. And the idea of that was to get people who are isolated from the experience of telling people about their synchronicity. Oh, you're just crazy, or you don't know what you're talking about. You ought to see a mental health person. It's still happening a lot, where we get people to know that this is a common experience, these synchronicities. That's basic, fundamental. And then they learn other people's experiences, and that helps them expand their own. And that idea now we are trying to escalate into yet some other projects.
And, there may be someone watching this right now who's saying, wow, what a coincidence. I was just saying, what I really need is a place where I can go and meet like-minded people and talk about these things that are happening in my life.
Well, you've got it, Sandie.
Yeah.
Just contact me wherever they said you can, and I'll send you the link.
So, I think that this whole thing about it's the words that get in the way, the coincidence, the synchronicity, when really we're talking about something much bigger than this. We're talking about our ability to connect with one another in ways that, are unseen ways. And I think that that's something that people really need to begin to understand, because this is something that is natural, you know.
It's very human. It's very social. We're very we very much want to connect and love each other.
Yeah.
That's
And
what,
all the statistics show that when we do, we're happier, we're healthier, we live longer, you know. So this is kind of that. There's a prime imperative right there.
it's a very big imperative, and
Mm.
I'm a psychotherapist, so that helping people connect with each other is part of synchronicity. Is part of what I'm trying to help people do. It's really fun to do it.
You must have heard many incredible stories. I mean, your own story is pretty, you know, incredible. It's very convincing. What do you have one that stands out above all the others?
I really like the penicillin one, just because it took place over 10 or 15 years, and multiple coincidences were necessary for it to happen. It was the most extended coincidence series that I know about. And the little bit of that, I'm just telling the beginning of the end, the alpha and the omega, but there are several steps in between it. And in 1921 or 22, Alexander Fleming, a Scottish microbiologist, who wanted to find an antibiotic that was going to help wounded soldiers, among others. He had a cold, and I collaborated on a song called "Alexander Had a Cold" to commemorate what happened. And he had nasal drippings go onto a petri dish. Petri dishes are where bacteria can grow, and they can feed the bacteria. And these nasal drippings fell on a bunch of bacteria growing on a petri dish and created a halo of inhibition in which there were no bacteria growing where the drip thing had, the drops had hit. So, okay, he didn't think much about that, but yeah, lysozyme, you can't really make a lot of lysozyme coming out of people's noses and way to manufacture it. So, okay. So he went on vacation in 1928 and 29 and came back. And what he did was not clean his petri dishes. He left them in the sink for 2 or 3 weeks while he was on vacation. And then he came back just to see what happened. And he noticed the same halo of inhibition in some of the petri dishes in the sink. And he noticed this golden fuzzy kind of thing around where there were no bacteria growing. So he wondered about that. They called it mold juice from a mold. And where did the mold come from? Well, he was working in a very open laboratory hospital building. They weren't tightly sealed off from each other. So one of the laboratory upstairs or downstairs was working with a mold, and that mold must have floated up the stairs or down the stairs into the sink and hit Fleming's petri dishes. So he wrote a paper about it and talked about it in 1929, but he's such a boring speaker. Nobody paid attention to him. Well, somehow over at Oxford, not too far away from the hospital he was working at in London, they learned that this mold juice could kill bacteria in a flask, so that they could use the flask again rather than just washing it out. It really killed bacteria. Well, there was a lot of steps after that until the bacteria, the mold juice became known as penicillin, got flown over to Peoria, Illinois, in the middle of World War II in the mid 40s, mid to early 40s, 1943, 44, and they wanted to take this mold and get more of it. They wanted to be able to find some penicillin that grew a lot more than they could do in England. So in Peoria, they had a lab, and they had this corn liquor that the molds like to grow in. So they sent army people all over the world looking for the penicillin mold that would work. Meanwhile, woman, Mary, I got to remember her last name, who's a laboratory assistant in the lab, goes to the marketplace on a Saturday in Peoria and sees this golden stuff growing on a cantaloupe. And she says, maybe this is it. And she brings it in, and this is the best producing mold that they had found, no matter where they looked in the world. It was right under their noses. And that's one of those like stories that maybe you've heard of. You can travel all over the world, but what you're looking for is right
under your
where
nose.
you are, right under your nose, right at home.
And it all started with his nose.
And all started. It all started with his nose. I didn't get that one. And I'm going to add this. That Fleming and two guys in London who helped develop the penicillin as an antibiotic got the Nobel Prize in 1945 in medicine or something, one of those. But Mary didn't get any recognition for what she did, and you're not surprised at that. And they ended up calling her Moldy Mary. And I bring this up again as a way to clearly recognize the male dominance in a situation where it wasn't deserved. She deserved her finding, just as Fleming was serendipitously found penicillin. She serendipitously found something that may have helped the Allies win in the World War II.
Yeah, that's often the way, isn't it? The lowly assistant gets overlooked, and it wouldn't have happened without them. We've only got a few minutes left. Do you want to talk about your new book?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about it because it's just starting the process. It probably won't be out for a year or so. But it's a autobiography told through coincidences, mine, starting pretty young, a little before 8 or 9, with my dog, my father, a football image that I mentioned. Just one of my favorites was in 6th grade, showing up in an elementary school, and they were having elections for student council president, and I just come from another school in Cleveland, and this was in Wilmington, Delaware, and I knew how to run an election. So serendipitously, I knew how to run an election and did it. And I had a poster that said that you fold the poster, close it, open this poster, and you will see who was voting for Bernie B. And you open the and there's a mirror in here. And I learned that from the previous place. So I was elected I did something else too, president of the student council in 6th grade, the first one they ever had. Unfortunately, I didn't pay attention in student council meetings in the previous school, and I didn't know how to run a meeting at all. So then we did the Wizard of Oz, and somehow they picked me to be the wizard. And the coincidence of that was pretty amazing, because the wizard was all bells and whistles the way I was, but just an ordinary guy. And that's just what I was, trying to be president of the student council. How they picked that for me that fits so well with what I don't know, but that was a startling coincidence early in my life.
So what is your hope for the Coincidence Project?
Just as we were talking about, to help people pay attention to illuminate the invisible currents that connect and unite us, to illuminate the invisible currents that connect and unite us, because we're in this thing together. Coincidence is not just telling you, or synchronicity not just telling you, they're giving you the experience of our connectedness, not only with each other, but also with animals, my dog, and Rupert Sheldrake and his dogs, and plants. And I can summarize, get the end. I have a 10-year, 12-year relationship with 3 trees in the forest near here. And we have dialogues, and we dance together, and they like me to sing certain songs to them. And they tell me stuff. So it's like we're connected. We've lost the connection to nature and each other, and synchronicity is one of the means by which to regain that connection. And the Coincidence Project is intending to get that message out as much as we can.
Do you think, you could start up coincidence groups, people actually meeting in the flesh in their area and talking about these things,
Let's.
as well as joining your cafe.
Why don't you help us do that? Yeah, definitely. It's we want to have local cafes, and what are you going to serve in the cafe? Well, you can have serendipity or synchronicity at at the cafe.
Okay.
There'd be various tables.
Now you're getting a bit corny, but it works.
Well, it's only it gets a laugh usually, and it did out of you, and so it's corny, but it works. And then have arrangements in the cafe if it was physical. But I just imagine these things, just having them, imagining what you just said. We have been imagining, we haven't had it happen yet, haven't gotten to having it happen.
Okay, just call it in, keep calling it in. Bernard Beitman, thank you for joining us today. It's always a treat to speak with you.
And it's fun talking with you too, Sandie, so thanks.
So, Meaningful Coincidences, How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen by Bernard Beitman is published by Simon & Schuster. And for more information about his work, books, and the Coincidence Project, visit coincider.com, coincider.com. And you can listen to Bernard's Connecting with Coincidence podcast on YouTube. And his blog posts are regularly published in Psychology Today. That's it for this week. All episodes of this show are available as podcasts on the Om Times website, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple, Google, Amazon, and Audible platforms for you to download and listen to on the go. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. Thanks for being with me today. I'll be back with another edition of What is Going On at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you to Bernard Beitman.
Thank you, Sandie.